Hello everyone, this is back to the beginner's guide for the solo lane specifically, because I am going to be talking about the solo lane specifically. Now, I could talk about warriors. I talked about guardians and itemization for guardians and warriors to some extent in the beginner's guide to support. I'm going to be doing this differently because I stated in the last episode, or what I really emphasized in the last episode, is that builds are very customizable to the needs of the moment. And so I'm not going to talk about items. Not really. It's just such individual build that you use every time, depending on specific contexts and situations, that it's not really worth getting into the items. That's going to be something you're going to have to do a combination of just watching people play and seeing how they respond to specific team compositions or specific opponents, and also figuring out how you want to respond individually, because how I respond to a particular enemy is going to be different to how anyone else responds, right? So I'm not going to talk about items, and I'm not really going to talk about warriors, because it's obviously warriors are just overall good here, but I will make some recommendations here. Now, when you're playing the solo lane with a warrior, you usually are going to be looking for that combination of tankiness and damage output, right? To that end, Erlang Shen is my least favorite solo lane warrior. I play him in the jungle usually, and the reason why is because he really doesn't have a whole lot of options for getting himself out of trouble or increasing his protections. In fact, the only time he takes less damage than normal is when he uses his ultimate, which is fairly inconsistent. He does have the shield from the turtle, which is fine, but we're not talking about protection increases. We're not talking about protection increases like you see from Undefeated Body. You don't have that. You don't have the defense boost from Torrent, right? It increases protections. You don't have any of that. So Erlang Shen is my least favorite in the solo lane for that reason. Shout out to Cook Lane, who only really does well in the solo lane because he basically has two versions of each ability, because he just goes berserk. He gets bonus health for this, right? Just from his everything. So it's, he gets, his mana is converted to health. When he picks up the mana buff, he heals himself over time, so that makes up for that in the solo lane, but Erlang Shen has none of that. So other than Erlang Shen being an anti-recommendation, go gung-ho, everyone else works just fine there. Odin even, he's got the Raven Shield, and he's got, of course, Path of Valhalla. Of course, I haven't used him in the solo lane for a very long time, because all he's got is Raven Shout, again. But the difference here between Raven Shout and the Turtle Shield of Erlang Shen is that the Raven Shout will actually increase its health based on your power. So you can actually still get a lot of health out of that Raven Shout shield. I still don't use him that often in the solo lane anymore, but he still works there. Erlang Shen's the only one I really don't like in that lane. You really do have to start winning early with Erlang Shen, or you just die. At least in my experience, and I've played him quite a lot. As you can see, I've got him to Diamond. So that's all I'm really going to say here. I normally recommend a back pocket, whatever, but as long as you have one warrior you're really happy with, you're really comfortable playing with, that's all you really need. It really doesn't make a huge difference what warrior. Even if you do pick Erlang Shen or Odin, with enough practice, their mild disadvantages in the lane are easily overcome. It's just not what I would recommend you starting with, at the very least. But on to more important subjects, Guardians. I am going to recommend, for everyone looking to become a solo main, I recommend you pick a Guardian as a back pocket solo, because at some point you're going to go into a match and your allies are going to feel particularly spicy, and they're going to pick a whole bunch of physical, right? It's going to happen sooner or later, so you really want some kind of magic solo laner in your back pocket to work with. Now, last episode I used Cerberus. He's one of my favorite solo lanes. He's extremely powerful. He's very good in the role. He's got sustain, he's got protections, he's got the ability to reduce enemy magic protections. He hits like a steam train. I love Cerberus. My favorite way of playing solo. But he's not the only one that works there. Or works really well there. Sylvanas actually, recently, with the change to his passive, works really well in the role now. Cthulhu, very strong in the role. Jormungandr, also very strong in the role. Xingqian used to be huge in solo lane. Less so now. He's fallen off a little bit, but he's still very strong, right? I personally prefer Cerberus because unlike a lot of these other options, he has that perfect balance of sustain, protections, and damage output. Sylvanas has better sustain, but he doesn't have quite as much damage. The pull is not quite as useful in the solo lane as it is the rest of the match. That's something you really want to be using in team fights, right? It's kind of useless when laning. So that puts him at a small disadvantage there. Yes, I am aware that some solo main Sylvanas is going to come in here and say, well, the pull can really help you lock in your target and whatever. Yes, that is true, but overall, in the solo lane, there's not been a ton of situations in which I've needed that. Yes, it does occasionally come in handy, but not terribly often. And when there's just the 1v1 going on, it's pretty easy to predict a Sylvanas pull and dodge it. So unless you're really good at playing mind games with the opponent, you're probably not going to hit a whole lot of pulls. Also, I forgot to mention Sobek is very strong in the solo lane as well. Cthulhu does a lot of damage. He doesn't have the sustain, which is why I don't normally go to him for this. But he is very strong in the role. Same thing with Jormungandr. Lots of damage, lots of protections, no sustain. Xingqian has HP 5 increases with his passive, so that's nice. I don't usually use Terra because I do find her a bit better in the support role. Put up the healing stone, heal a whole bunch of allies. It's generally how I like playing her. Sobek has a self-heal. He's got the protections. He's got again, he's got the throw over his shoulders the throw over his shoulder thing, and that's good, but it's not going to do you a lot of good in the solo lane. That's the main problem here. But again, that's not supremely concerning there. But yeah, I do recommend Cerberus. But if you want to experiment with other guardians and find your own favorite back pocket solo guardian, do it. Absolutely go for it. But I do strenuously recommend have a guardian that you can play really well in the solo lane. Alright? Now, what if you're a mad lad and you really want to play a ranged? Right? Well, okay, I'll talk about ranged solos and what I would recommend. But first, let's have a brief stop at the assassins. Now, you don't need an assassin in your back pocket. But, and I'm going to get to this with the Beginner's Guide to Jungle, junglers should have an assassin in their back pocket that they can use in the solo lane. To that end, I would really recommend either Ratatoskir or Ravan. Decently tanky. Ratatoskir can be customized to whatever role you're in, with the grace of the magic acorn. Can we get some... Okay, we'll have to do this. You'll notice that each one of these acorns has a very different emphasis. Completely different emphasis. This completely changes how Ratatoskir can play. As such, my default recommendation for jungle mains is learn Ratatoskir. Get decently good with Ratatoskir. No matter what role you wind up in, because obviously we're not going to get our preferred role all the time. It happens. And that's okay. If that happens to you when you're a jungle main, you get solo lane as a jungle main. I'm sorry, you get solo... Yeah, solo lane as a jungle main. That rhymes. Have Ratatoskir. Ravan, again, also works very well because Ravan is an unusually tankier assassin. He's got the Chain of Blows, percentage of health shield, and again, this increases. This is 5% of his max health, so you can increase this very easily. He's got a self-heal. He's got CC immunity with overhead kick. He's got damage mitigation on his ult. A nice high percentage damage mitigation. He's very useful in solo lane. But I recommend one of these two primarily. Other good suggestions are Thanatos if you're unusually aggressive. Set is good if you're practiced with him. Camazotz is extremely good in solo lane. Naja is very good in solo lane, but he has a little bit of a harder time in the late game compared to a lot of these other ones. Tsukiyomi is good in the solo lane as well. Nemesis, same thing as Naja. Again, experiment a little bit with some of these tankier assassins if you're a jungle main. If you're a solo main, your warriors are going to do just as good of a job. Just have that guardian back pocket. But what if you are looking to do ranged solo lane? Well, let's take a look at some range. For hunters, this is probably the most difficult role to play, is solo lane for hunters. My offhand recommendations for this are Amazon Cobb, who's got good sustain. Heimdall, as it's pronounced in game, because instead of buying teleport, you can actually just put your crystals down from the fountain to your tower and use that. And that is actually better than the teleport a lot of the time. Especially if you put it at the tier 2 tower instead of the tier 1, so you have easy access to your mana buff when you need it. He's very good in the solo lane for that reason, but he's very high risk, high reward. You goof that, you get slapped, because he's, again, a hunter. He's got very bad protections, default protections. It's going to be very easy to, if the opponent really knows what they're doing and they're aggressive enough and they have the right matchup, they can absolutely slap you down. So you do need to be very careful. That is high risk, high reward. Kind of the same thing with Jingwei, though. She flies halfway there, so she actually can do well in the solo lane if you're really good about farming, if you're really good with poking. Danzaburu is also pretty strong in the role. I haven't played a ton with him, obviously. I've only done 1 or 2 solo matches. He's decent enough in the role. Chiron is okay in the role as well. Not really somewhere I like playing him personally, but that's personal preference. Canonos can also play the role decently well. Apollo actually can play the role really well. You can fly in on your chariot back without using your teleport. Once again, we can forego the teleport, give you beads, give you that ability to get out, or some other kind of advantage through relics. And he actually gets a interesting boost in physical protections when he uses Serenade, which, if your matchup is correct, is very useful. So I would recommend those hunters if you are really insistent on doing that, but I would at least learn solo lane with a warrior first, so you at least understand more of the intricacies of the role, and then go into a hunter once you understand basically what you're trying to do here. Finally, for mages, Anubis, hands down, one of my favorite solo laning mages. He's got the increased protections from his passive. Sorrow, he's got absolutely huge damage in Plague of Locusts. He's got absolutely devastating 1v1 potential with Death Gaze, Mummify, Grasping Hands, and Plague of Locusts, of course, are really good at clearing waves. Absolutely fantastic. ESET, technically also, I have not seen an ESET played effectively in solo lane. I tried a couple of times. I haven't been able to get any good success with ESET in solo lane. Hades used to be a Guardian, so he's just going to be good there. Olrun is pretty good in that role, so is Freya. Again, high risk, high reward, because they don't have any kind of ways of keeping themselves alive other than self-heal. So it's a lot like the Heimdall situation, except without the ability to forego your teleport, unfortunately. Hell is really good in the role as well, but that again is going to require a certain amount of familiarity. Chang'e I've found to be very effective in the role. I've played her quite well in solo lane, because you don't even need to go back. You just need to send your rabbit back to the fountain and just constantly have that rabbit running back and forth, picking up items, even if they're consumables. You're low on health? Alright, the rabbit goes back for a health potion, right? So, yeah, I've actually played games where I haven't died or gone back to fountain as Chang'e on the solo lane for like the first 12, 15, 20 minutes easy. You're just there farming, and you poke them with your dances, and then you get out of dodge. I mean, it's if you can get it down, it's very annoying for the enemy. It's a very slow-paced game. Don't get me wrong, you're probably not going to kill them with Chang'e, unless you're building very specifically to do so. And that's okay, you don't need to. You just need to wear them down, because with her ability to heal, and the fact that she can send the rabbit back for a mana potion, so even if you steal her mana, she doesn't care, you're going to out-sustain him every time. So, there is that interesting gameplay. Kronos actually can do a decent job as well, because he does have the ability to self-heal himself, but again, I must repeat, it is difficult to make the ranged characters work in the solo lane. Just keep that in mind. But I did want to kind of talk very quickly about those specific scenarios, just some ideas of some characters you might want to consider if you want to branch out, or maybe you're already a solo main and you've played solo for a while, you understand the role, and you just want some suggestions on some things out of role you can try. Well, here you go. But yeah, that's all we're going to really talk about for this episode. Again, I'm going to pass over the items because it's going to depend on your laning opponent. It's going to depend on your opponent, the opposing team. It's going to depend on, the needs of your team. So I'm going to leave that here. So thank you all very much for joining me. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, ideas, suggestions, or requests, please leave them down in the comment section below. And if you have any, yeah, that's about it. If you like this, please like and subscribe, and have a great 24 hours.